Hello, I'm Professor Andrew Mangham, and I'm a professor of 19th century literature at the University of Reading. Today I'd like to talk to you briefly about Frankenstein, about a scientific context for the novel. To begin with, Frankenstein can claim to be the first science fiction novel. Although it drew on a number of Gothic ideas from late 18th century fiction, it drew upon the science of its day. More particularly, the early 19th century experienced a huge amount of discussion about the principle of life. What does life consist of? What does it mean? Two key figures in this debate were the British chemist Humphrey Davy and the Italian physiologist Luigi Galvani. During the 1780s, Galvani was performing a routine dissection on a frog. His scalpel accidentally touched a brass hook that was holding the amphibian in place, and this created an unexpected electrical spark. That spark caused the frog's legs to twitch. At the time in history, it was thought that movement was the main symptom of life, and that quickening of a fetus in the womb meant that baby was moving, and this explains why quick and alive mean the same thing in many historical works of fiction. When he saw the leg of the frog move then, and saw also that it had been created by electricity, Galvani believed that he'd found the secret to how things live. In this picture of his experiments, we can see Galvani developed a complicated apparatus for performing similar vivisections. An E marks where we can see one example of frog's legs. Now, these vivisections might seem quite cruel to frogs, which in many ways they were, but they were also a headline-making moment in science. They suggested that by harnessing the power of lightning, energy from the heavens, in other words, humans could imitate life, or in other words, lifeless matter could be artificially animated. In Britain, Humphrey Davy went on to create a theory of life as composed of a series of electronically charged atoms. In 1802, he undertook a series of demonstrations that excited the scientific world with lectures about the capacity of science to recreate the very essence of life. These demonstrations were imitated across Europe and America, and by the time that Mary Shelley was growing up in London, with a famous father connected to the period's major scientists, artificial reanimations were the talk of the intellectual world. Indeed, when Mary Shelley sat down to write Frankenstein, she was cohabiting with the famous radical poet Percy Shelley, a man who moved in the same intellectual circles that Mary had, and whose conversations with the poet Lord Byron inspired the science of Frankenstein. When Mary sat down to revise the novel in 1831, years after Percy's death, she wrote in the preface, "Many and long were the conversations between Lord Byron and Shelley, to which I was a devout but nearly silent listener. During one of these, various philosophical doctrines were discussed, and among others the nature of the principle of life, and whether there was any probability of its ever being discovered or communicated. Perhaps a corpse would be reanimated. Galvanism had given the token of such things. Perhaps the component parts of a creature might be manufactured, brought together, and endued with vital warmth." In many ways, Mary Shelley wanted to electrify her readers with her story. What's interesting about this 1831 preface is how Shelley uses scientific terminology to describe how she created the story. As she said, "I busied myself to think of a story, one which would speak to the mysterious fears of our nature and awaken thrilling horror, one to make the reader dread to look around, to curdle the blood and quicken the beatings of the heart." Notice the range of biological metaphors that she uses here. Curdle the blood, quicken the heart. These arguably are the effects an electrical current passing through the body creates. Most significantly, in the novel itself, Victor Frankenstein, like Luigi Galvani, appears to use the science of electricity to instill life into dead matter. He says, "After days and nights of incredible labour, After many nights of incredible labour and fatigue, I succeeded in discovering the cause of generation and life. Nay, more, I became myself capable of bestowing animation upon lifeless matter. While the author is cagey about Victor's methods of bestowing animation, it's clear from an earlier episode that Victor's research focuses on the powers of electricity. He is inspired early on by the destruction of an oak tree by lightning. It's worth looking at this extraordinary moment in some detail. We witnessed a most violent and terrible thunderstorm. It advanced from behind the mountains of Jura, and the thunder burst at once with frightful loudness from various quarters of the heavens. I remained, while the storm lasted, watching its progress with curiosity and delight. As I stood at the door, on a sudden I beheld a stream of fire issue from an old and beautiful oak. When we visited the next morning, we found the tree shattered in a singular manner. It was not splintered by the shock, but entirely reduced to thin ribbons of wood. I never beheld anything so utterly destroyed. The catastrophe of this tree excited my extreme astonishment, and I eagerly inquired of my father the nature and origin of thunder and lightning. He replied, electricity. After this event, Victor becomes obsessed with studying the effects of electricity. That element, it seems, has the power of God. But we also have a warning here. Electricity, the essence of animation, is the essence of animation. It doesn't simply create life, it also destroys it. Like the creature itself, the power of electricity is as destructive as it is exciting. Look, for instance, at all the paradoxes here. The thunderstorm is violent, it's terrible, it's frightening, and yet Victor watches it with curiosity, with delight, and with astonishment. Here we move back into the territory of Gothic horror. Yes, the novel draws on the experiments of visionary scientists like Davy and Galvani, but it also introduces a more ambivalent view of science, which its Gothicism is then able to flesh out. The physical powers of the universe may be all-powerful and astonishing, but they are as destructive as they are creative. The principles of life are also the principles of death.